all right. So let's just get into the video and hear what is talked about here.
One thing that we did want to talk about, Kyle, because we were chatting about this a little bit on our stream the other day, we noticed one of your videos got a lot of pushback in the comments. We always monitor how people's audiences and stuff are reacting to their takes. And it did look like you got a bit of pushback for this video about AOC being confronted by anti-war Tulsi fans. So I wanted to just quickly play the clip that we reacted to, not the whole clip, but just a couple minutes out of it.
We'd be here for 20 minutes, 30 minutes.
Exactly. And then I'll tell you where I slightly disagree. I think we mostly agree, honestly, but I just want to explain where I slightly disagree, and we can kind of hash out the beef. So let's play this clip real quick, and I'll break down where I kind of differ from you.
You originally voted, you ran as an outsider. Yet you've been voting to start this war in Ukraine.
What?
You're voting to start a thermonuclear war with Russia and China.
That is massively overstated. Who invaded who? Who invaded who? Russia invaded Ukraine. The U.S. didn't invade Ukraine. The U.S. didn't invade Russia. Ukraine didn't invade Russia. Russia invaded Ukraine. So in the wake of Russia invading Ukraine, why is it a bad thing to give them defensive weapons? Now, look, I've told you guys this. After the first 2 or 3 packages, I would have started to wrap it up a little bit. At this point, we've had, over a dozen packages sent to Ukraine, and it's been somewhere between $50 billion and $80 billion worth of weapons sent to Ukraine. Yeah, I agree that's overkill. And yeah, I agree that's probably because the politicians are enriching the military-industrial complex. That's probably the thing that they care about first and foremost. So I don't deny that it's overkill, but to say that this means you want a nuclear war, what kind of bullshit is that? If the United States sent weapons to Palestinians to defend themselves against Israeli aggression, would this guy say, "Oh, you're a war hawk. You're pro-war"? My guess is no. My guess is he would understand, well, those are defensive weapons to the Palestinians. So that's very different by its nature.
I mean, our audience, the RBN audience, is intellectually advanced enough to know that comparison is pretty terrible. I mean, just to pretend like what it is, who Israel is and what Israel is doing, colonizing a country, is the same thing of what's happening with the Israel Ukraine conflict. It's just a complete lack of understanding of what's happening. If you think that's an effective argument, if you think this is an effective analogy, it's just terrible.
Sure, because it is defensive.
All right, so there's the clip that we reacted to on the show, and where I, just slightly disagree with you. And in principle, I do agree with you. I don't think that in principle there's really anything wrong with arming countries who are under attack, or arming countries that need help, or just providing aid in general. I think the problem comes into play with the nuclear war possibility, and the fact that Putin has quite explicitly put that on the table and threatened basically Armageddon, in the words of Joe Biden, our president. So the comparison that I like to make, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this, is when we illegally and offensively invaded Iraq, do you think it would have been a good idea for a country like Russia, for example, another nuclear armed superpower, to step in and start sending packages of weapons and aid, lethal aid, to Saddam Hussein to protect Iraq?
So I do like this question by Gavin. I do like this question and this point of view on this topic here. So let's continue to listen.
From our invasion, because I don't think that would be a good idea. I think that would be escalating to nuclear armed superpowers into a potentially catastrophic situation. But how do you look at a situation like that, or a hypothetical like that?
Yeah, so I agree with you, but I'll add the caveat that I do think it's debatable. And I was going to bring up a similar example. When we invaded Iraq, Iran decided they were going to arm Shia militias in Iraq to fight the Americans. And so even though, like you just said, I don't agree with that, but I certainly think it's a debatable issue, because I wouldn't say that Iran in that situation wants World War III or wants war with America. I would say Iran wants the U.S. out of Iraq, and that's why they're doing that. By the same token, I think the U.S. wants Russia out of Ukraine. So I actually...
It's like to pretend, either to pretend or unaware of how this has been a long-term plan by the United States. The encirclement of Russia. It is just it is like is having an opinion without acknowledging or involving some of the facts of the story. And let's listen some more.
Need help, or just providing aid in general. I think the problem comes into play with the nuclear war possibility and the fact that Putin has quite explicitly put that on the table and threatened basically Armageddon, in the words of Joe Biden, our president. So the comparison that I like to make, and I'd be interested to hear your opinion on this, is when we illegally and offensively invaded Iraq, do you think it would have been a good idea for a country like Russia, for example, another nuclear armed superpower, to step in and start sending packages of weapons and aid, lethal aid, to Saddam Hussein to protect Iraq from our invasion? Because I don't think that would be a good idea. I think that would be escalating to nuclear armed superpowers into a potentially catastrophic situation. But how do you look at a situation like that, or a hypothetical like that?
Yeah, so I agree with you, but I'll add the caveat that
So he agrees with this. I'll save, because I just realized he's going to say something else. I need to save let's save that comment for that.
I do think it's debatable. And I was going to bring up a similar example. When we invaded Iraq, Iran decided they were going to arm Shia militias in Iraq to fight the Americans. And so even though, like you just said, I don't agree with that, but I certainly think it's a debatable issue, because I wouldn't say that Iran in that situation wants World War III or wants war with America. I would say Iran wants the U.S. out of Iraq, and that's why they're doing that. By the same token, I think the U.S. wants Russia out of Ukraine. So I actually think it's perfectly analogous in that sense. Is there any part of that you disagree with?
Well, the only thing I would say is that if we started saying we're going to start a nuclear war, going back to that time period, if we started threatening nuclear war, then no, I absolutely don't think in any way, shape, or form it would have been a good idea for Iran or any other country that had nukes. Iran didn't have nukes at the time, did they?
No, they don't even have nukes now. No.
Right, because of the Iran deal, correct. Yeah. So if they did, though, I think that any two countries that both have nukes escalating pretty much in any way would be a bad idea. So if we were saying at the time, hey, we're going to start a freaking nuclear war over this, and Iran kept sending more money and escalating the situation further and further, then no, I don't think that would have been a good idea at all. In the same way that I don't think it's a good idea for us to be escalating with Russia, who's explicitly threatening nuclear war. Again, I have all the solidarity with the people of Ukraine that have been displaced and killed by this unnecessary conflict. But I just worry that us intervening, given our track record, that it is escalating towards a nuclear war or a World War III type situation. And also, in the same way you brought up, the Israel-Palestine conflict, as much solidarity as I have with the Palestinian people, if Israel was, if we started arming Hamas, for example, I also don't think that would be a good idea.
Yeah.
This is not the same comparison. Israel is a colonial power. They are colonizing Palestine. Russia's not doing that. Like, there's a difference here.
Yeah, see, that's where again I agree with you, but I think it's a nuanced conversation, because
he keeps agreeing, but then says it's nuanced. That's very bizarre. I agree, but I think there's another side.
Nuclear war or World War III type situation. And also, in the same way you brought up, the Israel-Palestine conflict, as much solidarity as I have with the Palestinian people, if Israel was, if we started arming Hamas, for example, I also don't think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, see, that's where again I agree with you, but I think it's a nuanced conversation, because in principle, what I have a problem with the U.S. or anybody for that matter arming non-Hamas, non-extremist Palestinians for self-defense. I'd say, yeah, I mean,
non-Hamas, so the white power structure again gets to decide what is righteous defense and what's not. How about not? Why is the question though with Palestine? This is another layer of why this comparison is wrong. Is because you're asking the question of why this will be like us funding Palestine, but we're funding it. No, this will be like us funding Russia in your comparison, because that's what the United States is doing. In your own comparison, you're making it like Russia is Israel and United States is funding Israel. I mean, like I said, this is a terrible comparison, but if you want to use this comparison, the United States in your comparison would be the ones funding Russia.
I mean, I think
I just don't understand who. Again, I didn't grow up through the TYT era and all the people that branched off from TYT and watched them. And Kyle, I barely know all of this left media sphere for like 2 years. I don't know who would listen to Kyle for information. He doesn't come off to me as being intellectually on point whatsoever. He almost sounds like he just comes up with shit on the fly, like in this conversation, where he's just, yeah, I agree with you. But then there's nuance. But then there's this, because he's trying to play both sides. He's trying to leave open, because he really doesn't have an answer. Because he really doesn't know the policy that well. And really doesn't understand it outside of the perspective of the West lens. So let me throw up a couple of, I caught 2 super chats. I love this completely ahistoric world they're living in where the U.S. has never done anything in good faith. Exactly. IRT geopolitics. All this hypocritical banter seems to have you exasperated here. Have a donation and thank you for your coverage of what the bourgeois boutique left seeks to cover. Both sides aren't burnt crispy done. I kind of botched. I hope I didn't botch that too much, but thank you so much for that super chat. And let's get back to the conversation. This is a very historical geopolitical viewpoint on this war. It's like you don't take into account history, even if you know it.
I think that's a debatable issue. I wouldn't be upset if somebody wanted to do that, but to your point, you'd want to add stipulations of like none of this can go to Hamas because Hamas targets Israeli civilians, etc. So
you see here where this is so blatant, and I'm gonna give Kyle the benefit of the doubt here that he's not hearing, or what his point of view is illustrating the racism, not on his part, but of the situation, because there's stipulations that's needed for money going to Palestinians. It can't go to Hamas. Is there stipulations that not for that money not to go, or for those weapons not to go to Nazis? So we need stipulations for the brown people, but we don't need stipulations for the white people. And I'm not even comparing Hamas to Nazis whatsoever. I'm just trying to give him the benefit of the doubt that he doesn't understand, because there's a lot of stuff in this video clearly doesn't understand. So this could be another thing, and that's why I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt on this.
I mean, I think we largely agree. I just think it's a very nuanced conversation.
What nuance means in the professional managerial class world is that I'm going to take a position that's not left. Understand that. When anytime Jank uses nuance a lot too, I've heard Anna a couple of times, and I've heard Sam say it, nuance is the phrase that the professional managerial class uses as cover when they're going to be taking a right position. Watched enough of their videos where I'm picking up on that. So beware of their use of nuance. It's the same way of their use of solidarity. They don't mean solidarity in the way that solidarity is meant. They mean solidarity as unity. So let's listen.
I do agree that nuclear weapons does change the analysis. And I think you'd have to be like very hard-headed not to concede that point. That yes, nuclear weapons, it raises the stakes and it makes it so you have to be more cautious. But then I do want to ask you though, because I still stand by that I would have been fine, and I was fine with the first 2 or 3 packages of weapons going to Ukraine. I would have added the caveat that they should be tracked and none of it should get into the hands of the Azov battalion and all that stuff. But by your logic, saying, hey, since they're threatening nuclear war,
giving Kyle credit, he brings it up here. But like I said, think of the dynamic. If there were ever to be kind of layers on top of layers of oversight they would have, compared to Ukraine, they're just tossing money out.
Your war, it's like it's a whole different calculation, which I agree with. But would you then say like we shouldn't have sent anything to them at all?
No,
because if we didn't do that, then they would have been steamrolled.
You mean they would have peace? We would have peace. In the beginning, Vladimir Putin said, yeah, Zelensky can stay in power. They would have came in. Remember when Russia came in and they were playing softly, capturing people instead of killing them. Remember that? So if the United States never gave them money and they didn't have the ability to put up any sort of defense, they would have had a negotiated peace in the beginning, which they were already doing. This is why the boutique left, the professional managerial class, and the pseudo left, the NATO left, all the same overlapping category. This is why they get it wrong. They have no idea what they're talking about on foreign policy. You see it with Crystal Ball on Breaking Points, and why she literally, the foreign policy segments, Sagar is talking for like 90% of the entire thing, and then he just, what do you think? Yeah, and she just says, yeah, that's kind of bad, and blah blah blah. It's not no. Well, we should do is this, no sort of left perspective that is given, and they're freaking terrible at foreign policy. This is the reason why they don't hold it at a high priority when selecting candidates. This is why they throw out stupid shit like Marianne Williamson. Because foreign policy, it doesn't affect them. Doesn't affect their relatives, nothing. So let's continue.
I mean, the fact that they're even still hanging in there is a testament to the fact that we have basically allowed them to continue to be a country effectively. So do you agree with me that, hey, the first 2 or 3 times, you can give 2-3 billion, whatever it is, in weapons, so they have a chance to defend themselves? Or would you say, hey, since Russia has nuclear weapons, like, don't fuck with them at all, so don't give Ukraine any weapons? What would your take on that be?
Gavin a chance to answer that, but I do have.
There's a question on the left on whether an imperialist power who set up a coup to have all of this happen should be funding Ukraine people. How is that even a question on the left? How is that? You know what they would call this? Nuance. Nuance. Nuance is used when they want to take a left position. Remember that. I'm going to keep saying that. Nuance is the tool used, or the phrase used, when they want to cover up taking a right position. And that's mean right of center, not right as incorrect. So let's continue here.
You have one more thing that I think kind of does, kind of relate to your question, Kyle. And one of the things that I wanted to ask you about is how much you think, United States encroachment and NATO encroachment actually played a role in Russia's hostility towards Ukraine. So Gavin, go ahead and, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to follow up and talk about that as well.
Yeah, we can definitely talk about that. My answer is honestly no. I don't think that the U.S. should have intervened in any way. And again, there's really no good answers in this conflict, but I have to take the stance that given our track record, even just in the last 20 years as a nation, as a warring nation, as an imperialist power, I don't think we have any moral authority or any moral high ground in which to be intervening in these sort of conflicts, especially with a nuclear armed superpower. If the U.S. had a perfect track record and we ourselves had not engaged in illegal offensive invasions in the last 20 years, then maybe that would be different if we were just a completely neutral, good country. But that's just not the case. And again, given the massive hypocrisy of us intervening when we ourselves are guilty of the exact same thing, and probably would have, gone to war with Russia if they had tried to intervene when we did the exact same thing. I just don't think it's our place. So maybe if other countries that didn't have a similar track record as us wanted to get involved and help out, that's totally fine. But the way I see it is that there's a 100 humanitarian crises unfolding around the world right now, most of which we're enabling, most of which we're facilitating. And we just can't step in and, be the world police, unfortunately. So I do think that given my anti-interventionist perspective on this matter, no, I don't think we should have really intervened at all.
I mean,
Let's stop there. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good answer that Gavin gives. And I'm anti-interventionist. I mean, it's an extra layer of word. I mean, to me, anti-war covers all of this. Not the pseudo anti-war, but the actual anti-war, which is also anti-interventionist. That's part of it. What do you think he says here? But what this is also missing throughout this whole conversation is, no, we shouldn't be giving them weapons because they're Nazis. That's the one. But let's set that aside. No, we shouldn't be giving weapons because we're the ones who overthrew the democratically elected president to set this up. They're still not injecting that. That is almost just a footnote that should be laced through the conversation when answering these questions. That has to be the backing of in any answer, that the U.S. has set this up, and is literally the information is coming out where they're admitting the Minsk agreement. That was just to buy them time for this. So it is completely dealing in a world where you buy the facts that have been approved by the ruling class. And those facts is that this is not unprovoked. Now, what they do as leftists, I guess this makes them left, they just acknowledge it early in the conversation, but they don't apply it to none of their answers. let's continue with this interview.
I don't think that's a crazy opinion. I think that's a fair opinion. But I would just say that then, without a doubt, Ukraine today would be Russia. It wouldn't be Ukraine.
Oh, God, good Lord. Good thing Nick wasn't here for that. His head would explode on that one. So either Kyle is oddly uninformed on this, or he knows it and he's just going to still stay within the boundaries of the approved narrative. Because that answer he just gave makes it seem like Russia is like it's like Israel is coming. I'm going to invade. Now he's gonna allude to something else that kind of talks about this. But I'm going to invade everywhere, as if it wasn't the Donbass shelling, as if it wasn't the U.S.-backed overthrow of the democratically elected president there, and if it's not the weapons sent to a non-NATO country that's sitting in there, as if none of this stuff exists. Tell me this, and I'm going to bring this analogy up again. If you're facing, Kyle, somebody with a gun in their holster, then that person begins to reach for their gun. You're having an argument. The gun's in a holster. That person goes like this. Are you going to wait for them to pull it out and actually pull the gun, pull the trigger, before you physically respond? That's what you're going to do? It's almost like it's almost like this is not real people, real events. This is just a conversation of strategy, like that's, figuring out things like that. That's more of what it feels like the conversation is to him. Yeah, funny. I'm not gonna put that's crazy. I'm not gonna put that. But let's continue.
Ukraine would be gone.
Right. And that kind of leads into
Ukraine would not be gone. If we never funded them, this thing would be over. Multiple reports have come out that the UK in February of 2022, I think it's Boris, came in and said, no, flew out there. No, there will be no peace agreement. Here goes some more money. They were on the verge of a peace agreement. Zelensky and Russia was on the verge of a peace agreement, and it was stopped. So what would have happened would a peace agreement would have happened within 2 weeks. And it likely would have never been any invasion whatsoever. If the United States had been out of it since 2014.
into my question with you, Kyle, because I think that, part of my, obviously this is a nuanced, question, and it's so easy to come off as like, cold or like, whatever. I don't want to like come across like I'm not considering the, the turmoil and the will and the, of the, people of Ukraine. But to me, it does seem like if we're, trying to take a bird's eye view at this and look at it, as imperialist powers would, as, Putin will look at Russia and its position on the global stage, and Biden and the generals will look at the United States in its position on the global stage, and you look at what's happened, and you have a NATO agreement that's post World War II, right? And that was initially with the Soviet Union, but it's been honored by Russia, but the agreement was that there wouldn't be any encroachment onto Russia's border, right? And the United States and NATO have completely ignored that. And you can see over time in like those progressive maps where they change the color based off of who, has been brought into NATO, that they now have encroached on Russia's border, and it's got closer and closer and closer. And then you also have to think about the fact that, why does the U.S. have any interest in Ukraine, right? Why are we more interested in Ukraine and their sovereignty than we are about the sovereignty of Yemen? Right? Why are we not so concerned about what's going on over there that we have to send aid packages to Yemen, when instead we're just, letting Biden bend it over and take it from MBS, regardless of how he treats, Biden in regards to oil prices. We're still supporting them. So it's clear to me that it's mostly the oil, right? The natural resources that are in Ukraine. And I think that's why most of NATO's, invested in this at all, to the fact that they've entertained it at all. I don't think it's so much the fact that we care if Ukraine is reduced to rubble, in the same sense that we don't really care if Yemen is reduced to rubble, or if Syria is reduced to rubble. But in this case, there's, money to be made and there's oil to be had. So I'm just wondering if you think that, this is, again, one of our corrupt ventures that's just, there to be, a washing machine for corrupt money to go back into the hands of the military industrial complex, to better position the United States and to hinder Russia. And to the extent that that's been successful, I think we could debate. But I just think that there's so much more to, potentially that line of thinking. Like if you're thinking,
these guys know so much more about this war than Kyle. You can see it in his face as they're talking. He seems so uninterested. Let's
like,
continue.
how does the United States think about this? Then what it boils down to is like, we're doing this out of any kind of like, goodness in our hearts, because it would just be so incomparable to how we've treated other invaded countries around the world.
I mean, if it's going to be a really short conversation if you want me to concede that the U.S. doesn't, that the U.S. acts selfishly and like an imperialist power on the world stage, because I think that's fucking super obvious. That's the most obvious thing in the world to me. I mean,
that's obvious. But here comes the nuance. Watch. I see a nuance on the horizon.
That's all there is. We arm 73% of the world's dictatorships. So this notion that we are,
73%, but then we're gonna vote for them. Then we're gonna make up. Then we're gonna make up this progressive Democrat strategy and try to take over those people.
Principally involved in democracy and spreading democracy and being the world police, and that's why we do the things we do, because our intentions are so good. I think that's obviously not true. I think that when talking about this particular conflict, though, the nuance that a lot of people are missing is that sometimes you could accidentally
the right wing position that everybody's missing. Anytime he says nuance, substitute that for right wing position.
Wind up on a side that is not wrong, and just like I said, if the U.S. happened to arm Palestinians that are not Hamas and it's to defend Palestine, now they'd never do that, but if they did do that, I would say, wow, that's certainly an interesting and debatable thing, because on the one hand, I don't want to be a massive global.
It's funny how this conversation, when he keeps bringing in Palestine, it's funny how it never leads to, no, don't fund Palestine. How about we just stop funding Israel? You notice how that never comes up? Why don't we just stop funding Israel, Kyle? Why aren't y'all bringing up the fact that we're funding Israel in this conversation, in this analogy? I don't understand this.
Global arms dealer, but on the other hand, if we're going to arm anybody, I'd rather it go to them than the 73% of the world's dictatorships. So to your question about NATO specifically, NATO encroachment, yes, I used to think that was, if not the only reason for Russian aggression, I thought it was maybe the predominant reason, that like the majority reason why they're doing what they're doing.
So he said, no, I didn't think it was only, I thought it was a majority reason. So it's other reasons. So now he's saying that is not even the majority reason.
Is because they feel existentially threatened by NATO encroachment. Now, having watched the war unfold, having seen the actions that Putin has taken, and I think more importantly, just listen to his own words in his speech when he announced the invasion, I'm now of the belief that I think he would have done this anyway, even if NATO never expanded. But
off that last statement right there, I don't understand. If his audience just heard that last statement, it would be, I'm never listening to you again. I'm never listening to you again, Kyle. Let me play this again.
U.S. invaded Iraq, we had this whole list of reasons and grievances. It's like, oh, he has weapons of mass destruction. Oh, he's really bad against the Kurds. He's a brutal dictator. Like, they kept changing the reason and moving the goalposts, and they had their narrative and their propaganda, and all of it effectively was bullshit. Because I think fundamentally what it was for was oil. This is what an
Oh,
imperial.
I'm sorry. Did I not go back far enough? My bad, everybody. To that point that I was trying to find.
Or not Hamas, and it's to defend Palestine. Now, they'd never do that, but if they did do that, I would say, wow, that's certainly an interesting and debatable thing, because on the one hand, I don't want to be a massive global arms dealer, but on the other hand, if we're going to arm anybody, I'd rather it go to them than the 73% of the world's dictatorships. So to your question about NATO specifically, NATO encroachment, yes, I used to think that was, if not the only reason for Russian aggression, I thought it was maybe the predominant reason. That, like, the majority reason why they're doing what they're doing is because they feel existentially threatened by NATO encroachment. Now, having watched the war unfold, having seen the actions that Putin has taken, and I think more importantly, just listen to his own words in his speech when he announced the invasion, I'm now of the belief that I think he would have done this anyway, even if NATO never expanded.
The foreign policy by the professional managerial class is atrocious. And they think their atrocious ideas can be covered up by saying it's nuance. I think I'm going to end it there. I think I'm going to have to do this in parts because, like, I'm barely at 25 minutes and there's a bunch of stuff towards the back, for example, that we can also talk about. Let's see what he says.
Us away from the brink. It's okay. So I understand the disagreement. I get where she's coming from. I get where you guys are coming from. I just think when you look at the micro picture, the details matter to me, at least. And they sort of annoy me when it's sort of like a bullshit way they're going about it. And then, of course, the other thing was
yeah. And I don't know if I chimed in on the.
You have to do negotiation and diplomacy and get some sort of a deal. And that goes for Russia and Ukraine, and that goes for Israel and Palestine.
Agreed.
Right? Like, that's the main position of the left should be negotiation, diplomacy, find some sort of deal. The downside of a deal is nobody's really going to be happy. You're going to have people who are like barely okay with a deal, right? But if you can get a barely okay shit on both sides of it, then, we're everting potential apocalypse. So you have to do it.
Yeah, I think that's pretty inarguable. And I think that anyone that argues against that is just straight up silly.
We're really not to take we're not to take the professional managerial class seriously whatsoever on foreign policy. They're not serious. They don't even really
Give him an
learn
excuse.
it.
I don't want to give him something he could point to say, well, actually, that's the reason. Because really, it's propaganda. In the same way that when the U.S. invaded Iraq, we had this whole list of reasons and grievances. It's like, oh, he has weapons of mass destruction. Oh,
I'm gonna stop there and just squeeze past it by 30 seconds here.
Where, he's, essentially, kind of made the case that I think you were alluding to, which is, sending diplomats and trying to negotiate some sort of peaceful settlement. But I'm wondering what kind of compromises you think would be necessary for Putin to concede to a ceasefire, and do you think one exists where Ukraine still has some of its country left as its like sovereign nation, or what are your thoughts on?
Okay, so first of all, that's a great question. In fact, I would go as far as to say that is like the question. That is the only thing that actually matters in this conversation, and that's actually why I was super annoyed by these protesters, because the main thing they were arguing for was not, hey, get a peace deal, do diplomacy, negotiate, like, let's find a way.
Do a peace deal, negotiate. The protesters he got demolished, and we did a stream on this. He got demolished in his own comments when he covered that protest at AOC because he was completely wrong. And as you can tell in this video, he has not reflected on that and learned that from his mistakes. He's just doubling down on the bad policy. And now he thinks by him saying they didn't say in their protest words, do a peace deal. As if saying avert a nuclear war isn't saying get to peace. The protection of the squad and these people is to the death for the professional managerial class, the pseudo left, the NATO left. It's to the death.
The way out of this, the main thing they kept asking for was stop arming Ukraine. And I do think there's a fundamental difference between, like, the first thing in the conversation needs to be peace deal. Okay, that's the first thing. So to answer your question specifically, what would I do? And I did a whole thing on this.
So he's saying now the protesters didn't protest right. Your chant didn't include a couple of more words. Do anybody buy this from this guy? Like I said, some of you know him, I guess, when he was making good points. I've always known him at this ridiculous point. So I don't get why people listen to this person. I don't get, and I say this a lot when we're analyzing him, like, I don't get why that is.